I've played World of Warcraft since the day it was released, and up until 2 years ago when my first daughter was born, I still did. I met my husband because of that game and had 2 babies. That game saved me from the cruel reality that I was forced to endure at the hands of my father. I was safe in this virtual world, away from these sick things and harsh words and actions. I thought. I love to raid a lot, I mean religiously, and as a 16-year-old girl playing a game dominated by men, I got a lot of attention, 90% of it being negative. This is one of those, although I didn't think so at first. My guild and I were raiding, and our main tank was sick, so we were low a body for Nax. We found a new tank from a sister guild and began our raid night. I was a healer, and was assigned to set new tank. He was super nice and very talkative. We actually talked a lot that night, even long after the raid had ended. We even went so far as to exchange MySpace info and emails. His name in-game was Razor, so that's what I always called him. My name in-game was Chastity, so that's what he always called me. We didn't use real names, and now I'm so very glad for that. We talked forever, and I was thrilled to discover that he lived only 25 minutes away. Now, seeing that I was a 16-year-old girl, I posted way too much information about myself on MySpace. Way too much, keep that in mind. Razor and I talked for weeks and weeks, and he was so nice and even helped me through a tough breakup. We talked on the phone until the wee morning hours, and he listened to me cry and offered kind advice to a very lonely, very stupid teenager. Keep in mind, he said he was 27 at the time. Looking back at this, I now realize how creepy it was becoming, a lot earlier than I noticed it back then. He started flirting, and I must admit that I flirted with him a bit too. And then he got intimate, and as a 16-year-old girl, I've lived for attention. And then his emails got slightly violent. One incident in particular I remember was an email he sent, where he told me things that were really bad in what he wanted to do to me. But stupidly, even after reading those emails, I still continued to talk to him. One day, after walking my dog through the park, I returned home to the phone ringing off the hook. No one was home, which was normal, as both my parents worked a lot, so I answered it. It was him. The first thing that he said was, "Hey, I saw you today. You are so cute." And then he proceeded to describe my dog, everything that I was wearing and even my makeup. I said rather shakily, "Oh, why didn't you say hi? I didn't see you." He said, "Oh, I didn't want to scare you. You would know if you saw me. I have a lot of scars, mostly on my neck." Even back then, in all of my stupidity, I was starting to get scared. So I said, "Yeah, from what?" His reply was way too happy when he said, "From glass." All I remember next was hearing him say, "Can I come in?" I slammed the phone down and grabbed 2 of the biggest knives in the kitchen. I grabbed my dog, a 200-pound St. Bernard, and hauled her into my room. As I was barricading my door, I heard someone pounding on the front door. The pounding continued for what seemed like hours on end, until it got dark. I jumped at every single noise that I heard, until my mom eventually got home. I never answered any more of his phone calls or emails after that, though he sent tons and emailed me several hundred times a day. I am so glad that I didn't open that door. I live in a small town. You blink and you miss it. The best that we can boast about is a single stop sign and a gas station, which we only had because of the nearby highway. Any actual semblance of a town is 25 minutes away. So when things get scary out here, it's amplified. The occasional homeless person is no big deal. They're often just drifting on through. Addicts run rampant and will steal everything they can from your house, but it's the norm out here. However, what happened a few years ago certainly was not normal. Originally, I was dead asleep in my bed. I only woke up because it was burning hot in my room, but it was summertime and there wasn't much that I could do. I just remember tossing and turning until I got a creepy feeling that fell into the pit of my stomach. I glanced over to the bathroom door that was open with the light on. Everything was normal. I left the light on so I wouldn't trip and die if I had to pee in the middle of the night. Next, I glanced at the window directly across from my bed. I had no curtains, but I did have a crappy set of blinds. Part of the blinds were broken from wear and tear, and the crappy AC output beneath it would make them move back and forth, so you would get a glimpse of the outside every so often. The backyard light was still going, but what made me stop was the outline of my window. The figure of someone was directly at my window, almost like it was waiting for the blinds to move to watch me. I didn't have an imagination as a child. That had been trained right out of me. But the sight was enough to pour every horror film into my head at that moment. I squeezed my eyes shut and pulled my blankets over my head and slept in a cloth oven that night. By morning time, the figure was gone. I remember running to my mom's room on the verge of tears in the morning, telling her what had happened. She had laughed at me like I was an idiot, and told me that it was probably just a stray cat that had climbed up there for one odd reason or another. I had almost believed her since my window was pretty high off the ground, but something didn't sit right. Later that day when we were doing yard work, I glanced over at my window and saw one of our metal patio chairs had been pushed up to it. I pointed it out to my mom, who proceeded to chew me out. "That's how the cat probably got up there. Stop leaving furniture everywhere." But I haven't moved it. It was heavy enough that I struggled with it. So we moved it back, and so began a pattern. At night, I would see the figure, complain to my mom, and we would find a chair moved back every single morning. This went on for a few weeks. My mother stopped caring about my concerns until one morning we saw where the outside screen of my window had been sliced open. I still remember shaking her head and complaining about those dang stray cats that we had still yet to see. I could tell that she was unnerved by that development. I couldn't handle it anymore, and I opted to sleep in our living room that night. The only problem was our kitchen and living room connected, which meant there were always several windows. The first night of my move went well, despite my back hurting from sleeping on the couch. I avoided my room like the plague. It wasn't until about 4 days later that we ran into an issue. I woke up and glanced at the clock above the fireplace. It read a little past 3 a.m. I couldn't realize why I had woken up until it had happened again. There was a beam of light shining in from the kitchen window, almost like someone was shining a flashlight in. I saw a trace along the walls and land on the love seat across from the couch that I was on. I was mortified. When I told my mom, she continued to laugh at me. I gave in and decided that I would sleep in my dad's room, even though it had a gigantic window. He slept in the recliner with a huge TV, so I felt more safe having someone around. The yard light was directly outside of the window anyways, and it seemed foolproof. That was until I woke up out of habitual fear and watched through the window across from the bed. Everything seemed normal as time drug on, and I felt like an idiot. Maybe my mom was right. That was until I saw a lone figure come out of the woods by the backyard shed, walk directly under the light, and head to the patio furniture like he had been there plenty of times before. I still remember the large build that the man had, and the confidence like he was the one who lived here, and wasn't creeping around in my yard in the dead of night. I just remember listening to the TV until I fell asleep again, hoping to get another glimpse. My dad would have been mad if I had woken him up. He was grumpy on a good day and terrified on a bad day. I didn't feel like risking it unless I had solid proof because I was scared. The next morning, my mom chewed me out again for the patio furniture, which was routine almost a month later. But this time, something new had happened. She demanded that I stop playing in the toolboxes of the garage. A bunch of tools had been taken out and left on our doorstep. Screwdrivers, a large hammer, flashlights, etc. It wasn't me. I begged with my mom and pleaded with her, just to stay up with me one night. We couldn't close our garage because it was an open carport, and I wasn't going to get my butt beaten for touching tools because of someone else. It was driving me mad, and she finally agreed. That night, we would stay awake in the living room. I finally fell asleep before my mom did, but I remember her waking me up in a panic. She pointed to the window that overlooked into our garage. We could see the top of someone's head as they walked back and forth. There was the sound of someone placing metal tools down on the brick steps, as if they were trying to be quiet but couldn't fully muffle it. She whispered for me to go wake my dad. My dad was angry, having been woken up in the middle of the night by his frantic daughter. He grabbed his pistol and headed out from the back door, towards the front of the house where the garage was located. We heard my dad screaming, and someone dropping tools, and then the shot of a gun twice. The frantic footsteps pounding out of the garage felt like they were coming from my chest. My mom peeked out of the window and then opened the door, and my dad stumbled in. He had missed both shots because of his unstable aim, but told us that there was a man crouching at our front door looking at our door handle. None of us slept that night, and in the morning, the law from the closest town had arrived. They didn't do much besides ask if anything had been stolen, for a description of the man, and then told us to install cameras. That was it. They said the guy was probably just looking for something easy to steal for quick money. If that had been the case, why hadn't he stolen the tools, the generator, the welder, or broken into any of the vehicles in the garage? We finally set up some hunting trail cams around the house, but nothing has happened since. Coming home from college for holidays, I still have nightmares about the incidents years later when I sleep in my own bed. I don't know what he was looking for or why he did the things that he did. Whatever the case may be, I hope we never see him again. This happened a month ago when I was working at a store called Box Lunch. It was on the upper level of a mall. I'm 16 and a dude, and I've worked there for maybe 5 to 6 months before this happened. I was working the late shift, which was from 6 to 9 p.m. that day. Store closes at 9, and that's when I would lock up and leave. I was working with one other person that night. Let's call her May. She was my age, but maybe an older by a month. She was a super fun person to hang out with and to work with. She was chill and not super talkative, which was great because I'm not talkative either. We went to the same high school, so we sort of knew each other and got along easily. I would even pick her up sometimes to go to work if we were working the same shift. Side note, totally not related to the story, but I think May liked me, and I kinda hope so cause I really liked her too. Anyways, we were both behind the counter just talking and laughing. May I remind you that there was barely anyone in the mall because it was late, so that left me and May alone in the store for a while. So, as we're talking, this skinny man wearing a train conductor hat walks into the store. He was an older man, maybe in his 50s or a little bit older. He was wearing this dirty green jacket and badly ripped up jeans. This dude looked like he was homeless, but I didn't want to assume anything. May greeted him with a smile and he didn't pay attention to her, just kept on walking through the store. We kinda looked at each other with a sort of, yikes, what's up with this guy look. As he was walking through the store, I kept an eye on him, to make sure that he wouldn't try to steal anything. I didn't see him try to reach for anything, but he kept talking to himself and glancing back at May and I. Mainly May. I was getting a weird vibe off this guy. After about 15 minutes, the guy walked up to the counter and placed a Terminator Funko Pop on the counter. I asked him the usual cashier questions, which he didn't answer any of them. He wasn't even looking at me. He kept glancing at May, who was messing around with the computer. I don't think she noticed. I told him his total, and he pulled out a crumpled up $10 bill and handed it to me. He took the Funko Pop and laughed. No receipt, no change. He walked out, and that was the end of it. May and I just talked about the guy and what had happened. Some chills and some laughs. Before we knew it, our shift was over and we began to lock up for the night. We headed out to my car in the parking lot. We talked, and it felt like any other regular day where I would drive her home and see her next time that we worked. But this wasn't the same. When we got pretty close to my car, May noticed that there was something on my hood. I didn't see it at first because it looked small from where we were standing. When we came up to the car, I realized what it was, and my heart sank. And I think May's heart did too because of the look on her face. It was the Terminator figurine that the weird man had bought in the store. I picked it up and looked at it. May was freaking out and looking all around the parking lot, trying to find the man. It didn't make any sense to me. How could this guy know which car was mine? I looked up and joined May in looking around the parking lot. And then I noticed the same man standing under one of these street lamps in front of me. It was like something out of a movie because once he saw me look at him, he began walking towards us slowly. I told May to get in the car and she didn't object. We both jumped in and I left the parking lot as fast as my car would go. We were both freaked out and we were trying to figure out what just happened on the drive to her house. Over the next week or so, we talked about it at school, at work, and to each other. We never told anyone because they probably wouldn't have believed us. In high school, I had a stalker. I was 16 and we had met on Facebook. He went to a school nearby and we decided to meet up for a movie. We had a great time together and we ended up dating. The first time he came to my parents' house, he had an ankle monitor on for house arrest, and he wouldn't tell anyone why. Red flag number 1. And since he was a minor, we couldn't find out. My parents obviously didn't allow us to hang out, so we would hang out at his house or around town at the YMCA camp. I was rebellious and naive at the time. Things started to get weird when I noticed his family was pretty odd. One day, we were getting it on in his bedroom and I saw his father looking in through the blinds. I screamed and called him out on it and his dad ran off. The stalker guy told me that his dad was just into redheads and he liked to watch us, so this hadn't been the first time. I went to leave and his mom was doing drugs in the kitchen, so I decided it was probably time to break up. This is when it got bad. He started crying and he told me that he's in cancer treatment and that's why he needs me. He doesn't have long to live, blah blah blah. I believed him and told him that we could be friends. And this is when the stalking had started. He switched schools to my high school but never went to class. He would just stand outside of my classroom looking inside until it was a passing period. When I would leave the classroom, he wouldn't address me. He would just follow about 10 to 15 feet behind me to my next period and stand outside the classroom again. I was too intimidated to say something to him. He was about 6'4" and a very heavy-set guy, so I kind of let it happen for weeks. It started to progress to where he would follow me home every day. He would get on the same bus as me, despite living across town, and walk 10 to 15 feet behind me all the way to my house. He would stand outside, just staring up at the window until around the time my parents got home, and then he would just leave. Finally, I told him to screw off and to leave me alone. I told him that we could no longer be friends or acquaintances and to forget about me. However, that escalated things way further. I started getting about 150 calls a night. Half of them were him screaming death threats and in detail methods on what he wanted to do to me, and the other half were him singing me love songs that he wrote on his guitar. Every time I blocked his number, he seemed to just magically get a new one and leave more messages on that. I woke up one day to see that overnight, he had left me one of those dancing, singing snowmen on my porch. He had stabbed it in the head with a knife and it was still sticking out of it. He had covered it in his liquid deodorant that I had previously mentioned liking the smell of. And I noticed there was a hole where the little song recording device was. When I pressed the hand, it was not the regular Frosty the Snowman song that played. It was his voice singing eerily, "I'm going to have you forever. I'm never going to let you be." I was done at this point and I told my parents, who contacted the school. They suspended him, but he still waited at my bus stop every day and walked to my home with me. One day he ran at me like he was going to tackle me. When I tensed up for the impact, he stopped and hugged me. But it wasn't a regular hug. It was like he was trying to crush me. I was only 5'1" and about 90 pounds at the time, and he ended up cracking one of my ribs. I cried and he started crying too before running off. He left me a voicemail apologizing in song later. This one night is the night that I'll never forget, and it's the reason that we got a restraining order and my dad got a gun. I woke up one evening for no reason, just I was fully awake. I got up to go into the kitchen to get a glass of water to relax, and in the reflection of the fridge, I saw movement in my backyard. I couldn't see well because it was so dark outside and so light inside, so I went to the back sliding glass door to get a better look. When I got closer, I was met with the silhouette of a 6'4" man just standing outside the door. Stalker guy was in my backyard, under my room at 3 a.m. He was just staring at me. I yelled at my parents to get up, but he was gone by the time that my dad went outside. There's a patio right outside my bedroom window that goes all the way to the ground, so it's possible that he could have been on top of the patio looking directly into my bedroom window before. We got a restraining order granted shortly after that, and the stalker guy dropped out of my school. I haven't seen him since in person, but every about 6 months he makes a new Facebook and tries to friend request me. I just block it and report it every time. Scary stuff. Have you all ever heard of that myth that if you wake up in the middle of the night for no reason, there's likely something looking at you? Well, maybe it's true.